Perdana Menteri Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim dijadual menyampaikan kenyataan negara pada Perhimpunan Agung Pertubuhan Bangsa-Bangsa Bersatu PBB ke-78 di New York malam ini. Perdana Menteri Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim mengadakan pertemuan dan interaksi bersama 15 syarikat terkemuka Amerika Syarikat yang tersenarai dalam Fortune 500. Ia termasuk Airbnb, Amazon, Amazon Web Services, Boeing, ConocoPhillips dan Kimberly-Clark di Harvard Club, New York pada Khamis. Presiden Palestin Mahmud Abbas menegaskan bahawa keamanan di Timur Tengah tidak dapat dicapai sehinggalah Palestin diberikan hak penuh. Ikuti liputan berita dan analisis menyeluruh setiap hari di saluran 501 dan astroawani.com.
Assalamualaikum dan selamat sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton Niaga AWANI bersama saya Nabilah Khalida. Perdana Menteri Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim dijadual menyampaikan kenyataan negara pada Perhimpunan Agung Pertubuhan Bangsa-Bangsa Bersatu PBB ke-78 di New York hari ini. Kenyataan negara itu dijadual berlangsung sekitar 10 pagi Jumaat waktu tempatan bersamaan 10 malam ini waktu Malaysia. Ini merupakan kemunculan pertama Anwar sebagai Perdana Menteri di perhimpunan tahunan itu. Tema perbahasan umum tahun ini ialah membina semula kepercayaan dan menghidupkan semula perpaduan global, mempercepatkan tindakan agenda 2030 dan matlamat pembangunan mampan SDG ke arah keamanan, kemakmuran, kemajuan dan kemampanan untuk semua. Menteri Luar Datuk Seri Zamril Abdul Kadir sebelum ini berkata Anwar akan berkongsikan usaha Malaysia dalam menangani krisis iklim dan tindakan yang diambil bagi mencapai agenda 2030. Lebih daripada 150 pemimpin dunia berkumpul di New York sejak pada Selasa tanpa 4 pemimpin daripada 5 anggota tetap Majlis Keselamatan Pertubuhan Antarabangsa itu. Pada tahun ini, UNGA yang merupakan badan pembuat dasar Pertubuhan Bangsa-Bangsa Bersatu PBB sekali lagi menubuhkan isu seperti krisis makanan global, kenaikan harga makanan, pemanasan global dan konflik Ukraine-Rusia. Jadi untuk berbincang lebih lanjut berkenaan merancakkan usaha matlamat pembangunan mampan atau SDG ini, bersama saya dalam talian ialah Profesor Datin Sri Dr. Suhaiza Hanim Muhammad Zailani yang merupakan pengarah Pusat Pengajian Pembangunan Ungku Aziz UAC Universiti Melaya. Selamat pagi Dr. Prof.
Selamat pagi. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih kerana bersama dengan saya. Dan pertama sekali, boleh Prof kongsikan di mana kedudukan Malaysia ketika ini dalam memenuhi 17 aspirasi SDG dan mungkin juga boleh kongsikan apakah matlamat atau goals yang kita mahu kecapi dan apakah antara yang kita Malaysia ke depan dan apa juga yang kita terkebelakang dalam SDG ini sendiri.
Okey, selamat pagi. Assalamualaikum. Okey, saya amat tertarik untuk berbicara tentang SDG ya, sebab itu adalah salah satu daripada research interest yang saya sedang lakukan ya. Kalau kita lihat pencapaian di mana Malaysia ketika ini dari segi tahap pencapaian SDG, saya mungkin agak berminat untuk bercakap kita agak memuaskan. Perkembangan dalam pencapaian matlamat SDG agak memuaskan, yang mana ada di antara 17 matlamat itu kita ada yang ke depan daripada jiran-jiran yang lain ya. Walaupun ranking kita adalah agak lebih ke bawah berbanding Indonesia, Singapura dan juga Thailand, tapi indeks kita agak memuaskan ya, hampir kepada 70% ya. Kita di bawah Indonesia di ranking 78 daripada total 116 ya. Jadi di situ kita boleh kita rangkumkan bahawa terdapat beberapa matlamat SDG yang telah kita telah capai dan ada juga beberapa yang kita masih lagi perlu untuk perkemaskan ya. Suka cerita untuk saya maklumkan bahawa di sini kalau lihat daripada data yang diperolehi ya, SDG pertama iaitu poverty, alhamdulillah kita mencapai green color ya, yang menunjukkan bahawa there is some achievement yang telah kita capai dari segi mencapai matlamat poverty sendiri ya, dari segi poverty eradication. Mungkin ini menunjukkan bahawa dengan adanya pelbagai program yang dilaksanakan oleh pelbagai agensi dalam untuk membasmikan kemiskinan dengan adanya Malaysia Madani, mungkin itu menjadi tunjak why we can be more further ya to improve kita punya all the index dalam matlamat SDG ini ya. Dan ada beberapa seperti untuk energi ya, kita lihat sumber tenaga yang boleh diperbarui, itu kita dah ada one step ahead, yang mana baru-baru ini kita Perdana Menteri telah lancarkan ya satu dasar yang boleh kita guna pakai untuk bagaimana setiap industri, setiap agensi bekerjasama dalam memenuhi ataupun mencapai aspirasi untuk kita adakan satu sumber baru dalam mempengaruhi sumber tenaga kita ya di Malaysia pada masa ke depan. So kalau kita lihat SDG 2030, actually we are in the right directions. Cumanya perlu lebih perkukuhkan lagi strategi dan juga hala tuju supaya ia menjadi lebih holistik dan komprehensif, dan mana pelibatan kesemua pihak adalah amat diperlukan ya.
Okey Prof, itu tentang kemiskinan dan untuk kita berbicara lanjut tentang kemiskinan ni, kita tahu ia selari dengan kerangka ekonomi madani seperti yang Prof sebutkan juga, tapi kita nak tahu apa antara cabaran yang menjadi penghalang ataupun melambatkan kita punya usaha terhadap membasmi kemiskinan negara ni.
Ya, ini salah satu topik yang mungkin kita telah bicara 20 tahun yang lalu pun agak relevan untuk berbicara pada masa ini ya. Sebagai pengarah kepada pusat Ungku Aziz, yang mana legasi Ungku Aziz itu sendiri adalah untuk membasmikan kemiskinan. Kalau kita lihat di sini, walaupun telah lama kita bicara tentang kemiskinan, tetapi masih lagi isu ini diperkatakan ya. Terdapat beberapa cabaran yang perlu kita lihat dan perhalusi ya, bagaimana untuk tanganinya. Yang pertamanya kita lihat dari segi ada jurang dari segi pendapatan antara yang miskin dan yang kaya. Apabila jurang tersebut agak ketara, yang mana ini mengakibatkan keluarga miskin agak payah untuk nak keluar daripada kelompok atau kepompong kemiskinan itu sendiri ya. Tapi kalau kita lihat dari segi hala tuju kerajaan yang mahu membasmikan kemiskinan tegar, itu adalah salah satu langkah yang agak bagus ya, dan agak bertepatan dengan masa kini, yang mana kita mula menyedari bahawa ada beberapa langkah yang boleh kita kita adakan, seperti program pembasmian kemiskinan yang dilancarkan pada tahun lepas dan kini disambut pula dengan inisiatif pendapatan rakyat ya. Dan ancaman lain yang saya boleh lihat di sini adalah terdapat jurang dari segi infrastruktur ya, perbandingan di antara di kawasan bandar dan di kawasan luar bandar. Ya, kalau terlihat di sini daripada kajian-kajian yang dah dilakukan, di luar bandar itu agak terimpak dengan kekurangan infrastruktur pendidikan, akses kepada kesihatan, dan juga daripada bentuk jalan raya, the infrastruktur yang agak penting untuk kemaslahatan masyarakat ya, dari segi penggunaan air dan juga elektrik. Jadi kalau kita lihat di sini, pelbagai pihak perlu menangani dan perlu mengambil tindakan supaya tidak ada jurang yang agak ketara di antara bandar dan di luar bandar ya. Walaupun kita lihat di sini akses dari segi contohlah, dari segi komunikasi 4G dan juga 5G, MC telah melakukan pelbagai program untuk memastikan bahawa di luar bandar juga boleh dapat akses kepada internet. Kerana sekarang ni jurang internet, kepentingan internet itu agak penting, tidak kira umur, tidak kira bangsa, tidak kira kaum, amat penting untuk mendapat pengetahuan, mendapat maklumat, kerana itu yang akan memberi mereka lebih pengetahuan untuk mereka educate ya, untuk menambahkan pendapatan misalnya dan sebagainya ya. Jadi salah satu lagi cabaran yang saya mungkin boleh katakan sini ialah kita sebagai Malaysia, negara yang sedang membangun, yang menuju ke arah high income society atau high income nation, kita perlu memastikan bahawa punca ekonomi kita ya adalah pelbagai. Tidak hanya terfokus ataupun tertumpu kepada satu sektor ekonomi sahaja. Kita perlu mempelbagaikan dan juga menekankan kepentingan untuk melebihkan dari segi pengeluaran tempatan itu sendiri. Ya, ini boleh salah satunya boleh meningkatkan keupayaan kita untuk menjadi pengeluar dan seterusnya mengeksportkan barang kita ke luar negara ya. Dan ini secara langsungnya boleh meningkatkan pendapatan negara, boleh meningkatkan jumlah tenaga kerja dan sebagainya. Ini mungkin kalau kita boleh lihat di sini sekarang pun dengan isu ketidakdapatan bahan-bahan ekspor bahan-bahan import daripada luar negara kerana akibat masalah global. Jadi di sini perlulah kita mengambil inisiatif bagaimana kita boleh ke depan dalam menjadi pengeluar satu hari yang mampu untuk mengekspor barang kita ke luar negara, dan kita tak perlu bergantung terlalu kepada barangan-barangan import mungkin ini adalah solution kepada cabaran-cabaran tadi yang saya kata. Kita perlu melihat kepada pelbagai punca ekonomi supaya tidak ekonomi kita tertumpu pada satu aspek sahaja
Jadi Prof, dengan semua kerangka-kerangka yang diusulkan ataupun diunjurkan ini seperti NIMP, NATR dan semua dasar-dasar ini, adakah ia meletakkan hala tuju jelas Malaysia untuk memenuhi SDG menjelang tahun 2030? Bagaimana Prof?
Ya, saya memang berasa amat teruja sebab dengan adanya polisi-polisi dasar-dasar sedemikian, tentunya ia terus menjurus kepada pencapaian SDG di tahun 2030. Walaupun tidak hanya tertumpu pada satu aspirasi ataupun satu matlamat SDG, sepatutnya all secara total dasar ataupun strategi yang dilakukan perlulah merangkumi ke-17 ke semua aspirasi supaya kita boleh dengan kata lain kill one bird kill many birds with one stone daripada satu dasar itu sendiri, dan pelbagai matlamat SDG boleh dicapai. Dan saya suka cerita katakan kalau dari segi lihat dari segi sumber tenaga yang boleh diperbaharui dengan adanya tenaga hijau dan sebagainya dengan menggunakan solar dan sebagainya, itu adalah salah satu tindakan ataupun program yang boleh kita melatih lebih banyak tenaga kerja kita dari segi kita punya students, TVET dan sebagainya untuk ke depan dari segi inovasi dan juga dari segi teknologi. Jadi secara totalnya memang bertujuan untuk menuju kepada SDG yang tertentu untuk energi, tetapi impaknya boleh didapati untuk menepati matlamat-matlamat SDG yang lain Jadi kalau boleh in the future whatever programs ataupun dasar yang kita lakukan, perlulah kita strategize supaya lebih banyak matlamat boleh dicapai daripada satu perancangan dilakukan
Alright Prof, it's good to know that we're on the right path when it comes to SDG menjelang 2030 ni. Tapi akhir sekali saya nak tahu juga, sebab malam ni Perdana Menteri akan menyampaikan kenyataan negara dalam debat umum unggal malam ni. Jadi apa yang perlu kita menjadi penegasan Perdana Menteri pada malam ni pada pendapat Prof?
Ya, tentunya beberapa isu global yang perlu ditekankan oleh Datuk Seri PM tentunya tentang kolaborasi antarabangsa perlu ada. Dengan adanya sekatan bahan mentah seperti bijirin daripada Rusia dan sebagainya, itu memberi impak kepada negara-negara yang miskin yang mana mereka tentunya telah kemiskinan, kelaparan dan sebagainya. Jadi bila kita ada kolaborasi antarabangsa yang lebih menekankan bagaimana untuk menolong atau membantu negara-negara yang miskin ini, perlu dipertingkatkan Dan juga kita perlu lihat dari segi sektor perkilangan bagaimana menjurus kepada isu-isu global iklim dan ini perlu dititik beratkan yang mana isu iklim, biodiversity ataupun hijau, green, sustainable itu bukan daripada pihak kerajaan sahaja yang perlu tekankan, tapi perlu titik beratkan kepada keseluruhan industri global, supply chain tak kiralah di mana proses rantaian bekalan tersebut berlaku, tapi semua player dalam supply chain untuk memastikan bahawa supply dan demand itu dipenuhi, perlulah menitik beratkan juga isu-isu iklim ini Dan terakhirnya tentulah kita lihat kepada keselamatan. Kita perlu memikirkan tentang bagaimana untuk kita kedamaian sejagat itu agak penting menjadi punca bagaimana keseluruhan negara-negara ini boleh selamat dan terusnya beraya saing dan juga mampu untuk kehadapan dan ini tentunya akan memberi impak kepada pemerkasaan ekonomi secara seluruhannya jadi setiap satu poin ini tentunya our PM akan highlight. Saya rasa memang ini adalah tunjah kepada 6 nilai Malaysia Madani yang telah dilancarkan itu, dan mereka adalah berkait antara satu sama lain. Dan kita tidak boleh lihat dari segi perspektif Malaysia saja, ya. Kita lihat dari segi perspektif global, dan tentunya ialah berkait antara satu sama lain, ya. Dan again, dia punya bottom line adalah untuk pemerkasaan ekonomi.
Baik, dan diharapnya kita dapat mencapai kesemua 17 sasaran matlamat pembangunan mampan atau SDG ini menjelang tahun 2030, bukan saja di peringkat domestik tetapi global, terutama dalam membasmi kemiskinan tegar atau menoktahkan kemiskinan. Jadi sekali lagi saya mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Profesor Datin Sri Dr. Suhaiza Hanim Muhammad Zailani, Pengarah Pusat Pengajian Pembangunan Uku Aziz UAC Universiti Malaya. Baik, Perdana Menteri Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim mengadakan pertemuan dan interaksi bersama 15 syarikat terkemuka Amerika Syarikat yang tersenarai dalam Fortune 500. Ia termasuk Airbnb, Amazon Web Services, Boeing, ConocoPhillips dan Kimberly-Clark di Harvard Club New York, Amerika Syarikat pada Khamis.
Menurut beliau, kesempatan ini digunakan sepenuhnya untuk berkongsi kerangka ekonomi madani yang disokong oleh Pelan Induk Perindustrian Baru 2030, Pelan Hala 7 Peralihan Tenaga Negara serta kajian separuh penggal rancangan Malaysia ke-12 yang akan menjadi panduan dalam mencapai matlamat pembangunan negara. Dalam perkongsian di Facebook, beliau juga menghargai maklum balas positif dan input-input membina yang dikongsikan oleh syarikat-syarikat ini. Anwar yang kini berada di New York bagi menghadiri Perhimpunan Agung Pertubuhan Bangsa-Bangsa Bersatu UNGA ke-78 berkata Amerika ialah rakan dagang Malaysia yang ketiga terbesar sejak 2015. Dari segi pelaburan dalam sektor pembuatan, Malaysia menerima pelaburan langsung asing FDI dari Amerika bagi tempoh Januari hingga Jun 2023 dengan nilai berjumlah 1.84 bilion ringgit atau $395 juta Amerika, dan pelaburan ini telah menyumbang sebanyak 1,558 peluang pekerjaan. Anwar yang juga Menteri Kewangan berkata peranan Majlis dan Dewan Perniagaan seperti Majlis Perniagaan Amerika ASEAN USABC dan Dewan Perniagaan Amerika Syarikat USCC sebagai medium antara kerajaan dan komuniti perniagaan merupakan pemangkin kepada kejayaan pelaksanaan inisiatif kerajaan yang akhirnya bermanfaat untuk rakyat.
Biarpun terdapat pertambahan pelaburan dari China, Amerika Syarikat tetap merupakan pelabur utama Malaysia. Perdana Menteri Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim menjelaskan hubungan baik dengan Amerika Syarikat telah lama terjalin dan akan diteruskan.
Tambahnya lagi, perkara tersebut turut disentuh ketika pertemuannya bersama Naib Presiden Amerika Syarikat Kamala Harris di Jakarta baru-baru ini. Dia menegaskan Malaysia berkongsi banyak persamaan dalam beberapa isu dengan Amerika Syarikat.
China, of course, becomes a key player in the region, trade investments. But as you know, though there's a recent increase in terms of investments and trade with China, United States have been the traditional player, and the total investments is still number one. Total investments into Malaysia, United States remain as number one. And not only that, we have benefited immensely from the involvement of US companies and investments into Malaysia.
Beliau berkata demikian ketika berucap pada Majlis Invest Malaysia New York, anjuran Bursa Malaysia di New York pada Khamis.
Malaysia berkecuali dan menjalin hubungan baik dengan kuasa besar ekonomi iaitu Amerika Syarikat, China dan Eropah. Perdana Menteri Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim berkata, Malaysia juga terbuka untuk menjalin kerjasama dengan mana-mana negara bagi manfaat negara ini. Beliau berkata demikian pada Majlis Invest Malaysia New York 2023, anjuran Bursa Malaysia.
And as you say, yes, we have done so, our level best, and at the cost. Initial political uncertainties, but after 5-6 months, we are on track. Politically, it's very stable. We have 2/3 majority in Parliament, and I don't think we need more than that, and we become very autocratic regime, which all leaders have a tendency to like it that way. And so, be it, we should have a tough, vigorous opposition. And with that, we embark on very clear policies. We started with the economic Madani framework. Why? Because we want to show that whilst we support the notion of sustainability, and all the necessary ingredients that could propel the economy, we also have to acknowledge some of the concerns that we have to face in the changing geopolitical atmosphere. Our reliance traditionally in the investors from Europe and America, and now with the changing pattern, more trade investments from China. But how to navigate to ensure our centrality and to remain fiercely independent in the face of strong forces.
Generasi kini tak terhalang, perlukan perlindungan berpanjangan. Rexona 72 jam baharu dengan Active Shield Technology. Perlindungan punca peluh dan bau badan sepanjang 72 jam. Kekal segar apa jua. Rexona tak terhalang seperti anda.
Terdapat banyak kuman yang mengancam hari ini. Kerana itu, Lifebuoy dipertingkat dengan Multivitamins Plus. Mandi menggunakan Lifebuoy dengan Multivitamins Plus baharu. 10 kali perlindungan kuman untuk kulit yang sihat. Lifebuoy
dengan Multivitamins Plus.
Budak-budak tim kriket ni ada masalah disiplin kan? Ponting, rosak harta benda, mencuri.
Dulu dia orang bega. Tapi semua dah berubah dah.
I ask you for an average team, not a trash like this.
Season baru Premier League. Aku tak sabar nak tengok tau. Tapi jangan sampai ada gangguan sudah.
I say main selesa nampak?
Lain macam pakaian.
You sejak bila tengok bola ni?
Kenapa? Takut kalah? Okey, kita make a deal. Siapa kalah, dia kena basuh pinggan selama sebulan.
Deal.
Sebenarnya saya lebih daripada Chelsea dah.
Oh. Sayang.
Season baru Premier League dah start. Takkan nak tengok highlight kat YouTube je. Tak best. Suspend tak ada. Jadi akan lagi kencang kalau digabungkan dengan pack sukan Astro dengan Astro Fiber. Cangkecak.
Kementerian Pertanian dan Keterjaminan Makanan akan mengadakan pertemuan dengan Padi Beras Nasional Berhad bagi membincangkan isu bekalan beras tempatan negara.
Tuntutan China di Laut China Selatan, Kementerian Pertahanan MINDEF sentiasa bersiap siaga bagi menjaga perairan dan kedaulatan negara dalam menghadapi sebarang kemungkinan.
Usaha memperkasakan sekolah kebangsaan agar ia menjadi pilihan utama ibu bapa untuk menghantar anak-anak perlu terus dilakukan.
Bertemu kembali. Beberapa hari lepas, The Sept mengekalkan kadar faedah untuk mesyuarat dasar moneteri terbarunya sekaligus menetapi ramalan pasaran. Namun apa kesannya kepada ekonomi dunia dan bagaimana ia mempengaruhi pergerakan dasar moneteri di negara lain? Jadi kita bersama dengan pakar ekonomi MIDF Research, Abdul Muiz Murhalim. Selamat pagi, Muiz.
Selamat pagi.
Baik, pertama sekali kita tahu pengekalan kadar faedah 5.25% hingga 5.5% ini dikatakan seperti yang dijangka para pemerhati pasaran. Tapi pada mesyuarat yang sama, ada pengumuman penting yang juga disampaikan selepas pengumuman keputusan tersebut. Jadi mungkin Muiz boleh kongsikan apa mesej terbaru yang dikongsikan The Sept semalam? Maksud saya beberapa hari lepas.
Okey. Kalau kita lihat keputusan untuk mengekalkan kadar Fed Funds Rate pada 5.25 sehingga 5.5%, ianya adalah bertepatan dengan jangkaan pasaran. Namun bila kita lihat dari kenyataan yang dikeluarkan oleh Fed, ada dua perkara yang saya rasa boleh kita tekankan. Pertama, dari segi keadaan pertumbuhan ekonomi di Amerika Syarikat, ini nampak lebih kuat. Dan oleh sebab itu kita dapati pembuat dasar Fed sendiri telah menaikkan unjuran pertumbuhan ekonomi Amerika kepada 2.1% bagi tahun ini, iaitu lebih laju berbanding 1% yang dijangka sebelum ini. Dan apa yang lebih membimbangkan pasaran sebenarnya ialah mesej yang kedua, iaitu signal daripada Fed sendiri mungkin akan ada lagi satu kenaikan kadar faedah pada tahun ini. Yang ini menyebabkan jangkaan yang berlawanan dengan apa yang diunjurkan oleh pasaran, kerana kebanyakan pemerhati pasaran menjangkakan tiada lagi kenaikan kadar faedah pada tahun ini.
Kita tahu Fed juga ada menyatakan ekonomi Amerika Syarikat kekal kuat, tapi pada masa yang sama unjuran MIF kata dunia dijangka mengalami pertumbuhan yang lebih perlahan. Jadi ini sangat berlainan kan kenyataan ini. Jadi untuk bagaimana kita boleh melihat perkara ini, dan juga kalau boleh Muiz kongsikan kaitan dengan prestasi ekonomi Amerika Syarikat di mana ia akan mempengaruhi aktiviti perdagangan negara setakat 8 ke 9 bulan tahun ini. Muiz, mungkin apa Muiz boleh kongsi pandangan tentang perkara ini?
Ya, pada peringkat awal kita memang merasakan pertumbuhan akan lebih perlahan, kerana kita dapati kebiasaannya apabila kadar faedah ini dinaikkan, kita boleh menjangkakan pertumbuhan ekonomi kebanyakan negara akan menurun, sebab kita melihat kebanyakan bank pusat telah menaikkan kadar faedah kerana kebimbangan mengenai inflasi. Namun saya rasa tidak dinafikan, kita dapati pertumbuhan perbelanjaan runcit dan juga pembuatan industri di Amerika juga menunjukkan pertumbuhan yang lebih perlahan berbanding apa yang kita lihat sebelum ini. Dan oleh sebab pertumbuhan yang perlahan ini, kita masih mendapati prestasi ekspor negara pada setakat bulan Ogos, dalam tempoh 8 bulan pertama tahun ini dia menurun sebanyak lebih kurang 14%, dan ianya turut sama terjejas disebabkan penurunan ekspor ke Amerika yang menurun sebanyak 2.7% pada tempoh yang sama.
Jadi kalau kita lihat berkenaan situasi dekat Amerika Syarikat, kalau kita berbalik kepada situasi domestik, terutama berkenaan dengan prestasi dengan dagangan luar Malaysia yang makin merosot, ekspor, import yang terbaru ni ialah bulan Ogos yang merosot sebanyak 19.8%. Jadi Muiz mungkin boleh kongsikan mengapa situasi ini berlaku dan apa yang Muiz boleh ulaskan untuk kita fahami lebih mendalam tentang penyerotan ini.
Okey, kalau kita lihat dari segi data dagangan bagi bulan Ogos yang dikeluarkan beberapa hari lepas, memang kita dapati kejatuhannya adalah lebih besar. Contohnya ekspor menurun sebanyak 18 lebih kurang dalam 18% berbanding 13% pada bulan sebelumnya, dan import juga turut turun lebih laju, lebih kurang pada kadar 21% berbanding negatif 15 ke 16% pada bulan sebelumnya. Kelembapan ekspor ini sebelum ini kita dapati lebih disebabkan oleh kesan kelemahan ekspor komoditi yang berkait rapat dengan harga komoditi yang rendah. Contohnya kita dapati ekspor minyak sawit telah terjejas lebih awal sejak daripada hujung tahun lepas. Namun kita dapati pada bulan Ogos ini penurunan ekspor turut sama terkesan disebabkan penurunan ekspor E&E yang sebelum ini mencatatkan pertumbuhan lebih kurang dalam 2-3 bulan sebelumnya. Dan dari segi ekspor ke pasaran utama turut menurun, iaitu kita dapati ekspor menurun ke pasaran seperti Amerika, China dan juga negara-negara serantau. Cuma kita dapati penurunan ini bukan sekadar harga, sebab kita lihat data yang dikeluarkan oleh Jabatan Perangkaan turut menunjukkan penurunan dagangan adalah disebabkan volume yang turut menunjukkan penurunan. Jadi kita lihat ianya adalah kelembapan permintaan luar yang akhirnya menjejaskan prestasi dagangan negara pada tahun ini.
Muiz, kalau boleh saya berbalik kepada soal dasar monetary, mungkin apa jangkaan Muiz untuk hala tuju dasar monetary bank-bank pusat untuk tempoh akan datang? Adakah inflasi masih menjadi fokus utama ketika ini atau mungkin ada perkara lain yang perlu kita fokuskan untuk bergerak ke hadapan?
Okey, kalau kita lihat dari segi naratif ataupun fokus bank pusat, kalau kita lihat pada tahun lalu, ianya lebih tertumpu kepada mengawal inflasi. Pada masa sama kita dapati sebahagian bank-bank pusat turut mengurangkan rangsangan monetary apabila kita dapati pertumbuhan ekonomi semakin memulih. Namun pada peringkat ini kita rasa kita telah lihat kebanyakan bank pusat telah mula menghentikan kenaikan kadar faedah kerana lebih memberi tumpuan kepada memberi sokongan kepada pertumbuhan ekonomi. Sebaliknya kita dapati bank pusat utama seperti Fed, ECB dan juga Bank of England masih menunjukkan fokus utama mereka ialah mengawal inflasi. walaupun ECB dan Bank of England telah mengatakan mungkin tiada lagi kenaikan kerana inflasi menunjukkan penurunan, Fed sebaliknya seperti yang kita nyatakan tadi masih memberi signal yang kuat mereka masih ingin melihat inflasi menurun kepada paras yang lebih rendah.
Macam yang Muiz sebutkan tadi, saya suka tentang memberi signal untuk memberi satu lagi kenaikan kadar faedah. Tapi adakah bank pusat lain termasuk Bank Negara Malaysia akan turut sama mengetatkan lagi dasar monetary dalam mesyuarat akan datang atau bagaimana, Muiz?
Kalau kita lihat dari segi bank balance seperti saya nyatakan, kita dapati tekanan inflasi itu lebih perlahan. Oleh sebab itu, Bank Negara khususnya saya menjangkakan tiada lagi kenaikan OPR kerana kita dapati inflasi telah menurun kepada paras yang lebih sederhana iaitu sekitar 2% pada bulan Julai. Dan pada masa sama kita dapati momentum pertumbuhan ekonomi nampak lebih sederhana dan kita menjangkakan tumpuan Bank Negara akan lebih kepada memberi sokongan kepada menyokong pertumbuhan ekonomi.
Baik, tengah hari nanti kita tahu Dasum akan keluarkan data harga pengguna Malaysia untuk bulan Ogos. Pertama, saya mahu tahu tentang jangkaan Muiz sebab kita tahu tentang keadaan ekonomi kita, sebab saya sendiri tertanya bagaimana kenaikan harga beras baru ini dan dia akan menjejaskan inflasi pada bulan-bulan akan datang. Jadi apa pendapat Muiz tentang jangkaan inflasi pada bulan Ogos?
Okey, trend menyederhana ini kita dapati mungkin berterusan. Namun bila kita lihat jangkaan bagi bulan Ogos, saya menjangkakan ianya mungkin berada pada paras yang lebih kurang sama iaitu 2% seperti yang dicatatkan pada bulan Julai. Ini kerana saya masih melihat kebimbangan mengenai tekanan inflasi harga makanan ini mungkin menjadi fokus utama kepada tekanan harga dalam negara. Pada masa sama kita dapati terdapat juga kenaikan dalam harga minyak mentah yang mungkin turut sama akan memberi tekanan kepada keseluruhan inflasi di Malaysia. Mengenai kenaikan harga beras, bagi saya kesan langsung daripada kenaikan 20 ke 30% harga beras mungkin tidak memberi kesan besar kerana wajaran ataupun weight dalam kiraan indeks harga pengguna itu adalah kecil. Beras hanya mewakili 1.1%. Jadi peningkatan 10% hanya adalah tidak akan memberi kesan besar iaitu 0.1%. Namun apa yang lebih membimbangkan sekiranya kenaikan harga beras ini akan menyebabkan para peniaga menaikkan jualan barang makanan yang di luar. Dan ini mungkin akan memberi kesan lebih besar dan pada jangkaan saya sekiranya tekanan inflasi makanan ini terus menaik, kita mungkin boleh dapati tekanan inflasi mungkin akan sedikit lebih tinggi bagi bulan-bulan akan datang.
Baik, itu dia merupakan Abdul Muiz Nurhalim, pakar ekonomi MIDF Research. Terima kasih atas perkongsian tentang prestasi ekonomi. Kita akan jumpa lagi minggu depan. Baik, kita akan teruskan dengan melihat pergerakan ringgit berbanding dolar Amerika. Ringgit ditutup rendah berbanding dolar Amerika Syarikat pada Khamis apabila unit negara maju meningkat susulan kenyataan Rizab Persekutuan Amerika Syarikat yang cenderung untuk menaikkan kadar faedah. Penganalisis berkata prestasi ringgit adalah seiring dengan kebanyakan mata wang Asia yang merosot pada Khamis selepas Fed mengekalkan kadar faedah untuk sementara namun menegaskan akan kekal lebih tinggi untuk tempoh lebih panjang. Dan pada pada 6 petang semalam, mata wang tempatan menyusut kepada 4.6890. Namun prestasi setakat pagi ini, kalau boleh saya tunjukkan ini, setakat pada jam 9.24 pagi, ia berada pada paras 4.6880. Dan kalau boleh saya tunjukkan ini pada sekitar 1 minggu, prestasi ringgit berada dalam sekitar 4.6 ringgit berbanding dolar Amerika, dan itu berkenaan prestasi ringgit. Seterusnya kita akan terus melihat kepada pasaran bursa, di mana sementara pasaran bursa pada pagi ini ia berada pada kadar, kalau boleh saya tunjukkan di sini, pada paras 1444.90 mata, menurun sebanyak 3.31 mata dan 0.23%. Dan kalau saya boleh tunjuk di sini pada sekitar sepanjang 5 hari, Isnin, Selasa, Rabu, Khamis, Jumaat, kalau saya dah sebut tadi 1444. Kalau saya boleh tunjukkan setakat 1 minggu, ia berada di sekitar pada paras 1460 hingga 1440 mata. Dan seterusnya berkenaan dengan perkembangan antarabangsa, Wall Street tanked in a broad sell-off on Thursday as investors' risk appetite was dashed by worries that the Federal Reserve restrictive monetary policy will remain in place for longer than anticipated. All three major US stock indices tumbled more than 1%, and benchmark 10-year US Treasury yields touched a 16-year peak the day after Fed Chairman Jerome Powell warned inflation still has a long way to go before approaching the central bank's 2% target. Dow Jones fell 370.46 points to 34,070.42. S&P 500 lost 72.2 points to 4,330, and Nasdaq dropped 245.14 points to 13,223.99. Now let's take a look at some of the major stocks. S&P 500 map, and as I can show here, Microsoft on Thursday unveiled new Surface computers and revealed details on the release of this year's version of Windows 11, including its embedded Copilot AI assistant during an event in New York. If I can show you here the Microsoft stocks, as you can see, overview, the whole overview, it's red. The color is red, so it is down by 0.39%. And the company introduced the Surface Laptop Studio 2 and the Surface Laptop Go 3 and unveiled enterprise availability for Microsoft 365 Copilot, its supplemental AI tool for core productivity apps such as Word and Excel. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella began the event by speaking about how the company's Copilot AI tools will make a broad impact across its user base for consumers and enterprises. And moving on to Oracle, if I can show to you here, it is down by 3.05%. And on related news, Oracle expects to regenerate about $65 billion in annual revenue by fiscal year 2026, an outlook executives first provided a year ago in a lukewarm message to investors disappointed by the software maker's most recent quarterly results. An executive vice president said he is confident the company will reach its revenue target as well as earlier forecast for a 45% operating margin by fiscal year 2026 and annual growth in earnings per share of more than 10%. And Oracle is focused on increasing its business of renting cloud computing power and storage after long lagging behind Amazon.com, Microsoft Corporation and Alphabet Incorporation's Google. Investors have grown more optimistic than Oracle's cloud offering can rapidly expand and take advantage of demanding computing needs for artificial intelligence products. And some of the shine is wearing off shares of NVIDIA and other US semiconductor companies after a stunning 2022 rally as investors weigh steep valuations, rising treasury yields and signs of industry unease. And chip stocks soared the start this year, with Philadelphia SE Semiconductor Index rising over 50% through July. And no stock symbolized the chip industry's success more than NVIDIA, whose shares tripled in 2023 as the company's market value topped $1 trillion, driven by excitement over the central role of the company's products in artificial intelligence applications. And NVIDIA's recent weakness has come even after it far exceeded expectations with its revenue forecast when it reported quarterly results in late August. All right, moving on. Google, despite facing the antitrust trial in US, Alphabet's Google said on Thursday it does not see any change in its relationship with Broadcom following a media report the tech giant considered dropping the chip maker as a supplier of artificial intelligence chips as early as 2027. If I can show to you here, Google. All right, it's here. All right. It is dropped by 2.40%, and Google has been ramping up chip investments this year as it plays catch up with Microsoft for the domination of booming market for generative AI applications such as ChatGPT, and other sectors such as Meta, Apple, Amazon and Tesla also in red color at closing. Meanwhile, for oil and gas, counters were down on Thursday's trading. Oil prices settled lower after choppy trading on Thursday, rising as much as $1 a barrel after a Russian ban on fuel exports snatched the focus from Western economic headwinds that had pushed prices down $1 a barrel early in the session. Brent futures for November delivery settled down 23 cents to $93 a barrel, while US West Texas Intermediate crude settled down 3 cents to $89. Both benchmarks had risen and fallen more than $1 earlier on Thursday. That's all I can share to you for now. We're going to go for a short break. We'll be right back after this with Tamina Kausji.
Strong and Long baharu, menguatkan rambut dari akar ke hujung. Biarkan panjang. Strong and Long.
Generasi kini tak terhalang, perlukan perlindungan berpanjangan. Rexona 72 jam baharu dengan Active Shield Technology. Perlindungan punca peluh dan bau badan sepanjang 72 jam. Kekal segar apa jua. Rexona tak terhalang seperti anda.
Di sini, segala kisah original umpama hidup.
Welcome back, Kapwa.
Di sini, segala karakter original membawa anda ke pelbagai tempat. Di sini, segala cerita original umpama nyata.
You feel good?
It felt so real.
Idea baru, cara baru.
Di sini, Home of Originals.
Saya siul lagu ni.
Dan lebih banyak lagi untuk anda terukai bila-bila masa, di mana jua. Stream on demand dan Astro Premier di saluran 410.
Sebagai seorang usahawan atau pengusaha bisnes kecil dan sederhana, anda mesti sentiasa mencari ilmu, ilham atau apa jua kandungan yang dapat menambah baik atau mengembangkan bisnes anda, bukan? Jiwa SME tahun ini akan ke 5 lokasi. Zon Borneo, Zon Utara, Zon Selatan, Pantai Timur pun ada, dan Kuala Lumpur. Pelbagai aktiviti akan dijalankan, termasuklah sesi perkongsian dari pakar-pakar dan influencer terpilih, workshop untuk upskill dan ruang pameran. Untuk segala info dan update, sila layari www.jiwasme.com.my. Dalam masa sama, jangan lupa untuk ikuti program khas Jiwa SME di saluran 501 Astro Awani dan semua platform media sosial Astro Awani.
Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kausji. Niaga Spotlight goes through the week in business and future affairs. Market watch, industries, analysis and insights. We've got you covered on Niaga Spotlight. Well, today on, of course, analysis, Prof. Wong Chin Huat, political scientist and deputy head strategy at the Asia headquarters for UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network at Sunway University, joins me online to discuss the economic cost of by-elections. Hi, Chin Huat. Good morning, Prof. How are you doing?
Hi. Good morning. Thank you, Tamina, for having me.
Wonderful. So, Chin Huat, let's get started off by looking at some of the various factors behind high expenses for elections. Please begin by explaining these two very interesting concepts, simultaneity and predictability when it comes to Malaysian elections, and which is preferable and why?
Well, when we talk about simultaneous elections, we mean that federal and maybe most or if not all state elections are held together. This has been the case in the past, and many people thought that this year the state elections for the 6 states on their own is a bad idea. Now, I want to argue that simultaneity is actually very rare in federal country, especially in parliamentary system, because that different legislatures may have their own tie. And there is an argument why this is good to have them separated, because if you have elections for different legislature, different officers at different time, you capture public mood at different time. Therefore, they tend to produce different landscape and to enable a better check and balance. In other words, you would not have one party winning all states most states at the same time. And if you have a government change at the federal, you wouldn't have a shipping change, because over time you actually have adjust yourself to that. So this is actually good in the sense of in that it would reduce the cost of extreme volatility. What really make actually our elections more expensive on ordinary people is unpredictability. For example, we know when New Zealand next election would be in October, months ahead. And we certainly know when US elections would be 100 years from now. But we wouldn't know whether the 16th January elections would be held in February 2028 or any time earlier. That unpredictability actually causes market anxiety, prevent people from making decisions ahead, even in their daily decisions. That's a cost that often that has been overlooked.
Absolutely. And I think it's also worth Bear's mention that we spent around 120 million ringgit over the past 3 years alone when it came to those unexpected and unanticipated by-elections. A little bit more on that later, though. Moving along, though, now, Prof. Chin Huat, let's delve into some of the challenges for determining fixed budget when it comes to elections overall. What are some of the main issues, as well as, of course, the main areas towards which budget goes, as well as the problem with having a very fixed amount for it?
Well, I think certain parts that you can't really control, for example, how much the parties want to spend on political campaigns and so on. But other things are probably much easier to control. For example, if you know when the dates would be ahead, you can make arrangement for people who you need to employ, you need to train, and to conduct elections and so on. All this can actually minimize it. And we will also need to think about costs incur on the voters. Every elections now, we know that many voters have to travel back from far away, whether on land or by air and so on. And all these incur costs, not just on the voters, but on other people's using public transport or using the roads or railway. And it also increases sound pollution, air pollution, and loss in time because of traffic jams or risk, public health risk because of crowd and so on. Right? All these things could have been reduced if we actually expand the facilities of early voting or postal votings to all voters who are out of their states. This is done by many countries. We know that Indonesians and Filipinos queuing up in their at their embassies here for their presidential and national elections. Even though the systems are slightly different, we can actually do all these things. So there are parts of that our election costs can be controlled by minimizing or streamlining the process.
Absolutely. And also when it comes to tweaking the process, other examples might include saving on flag lines if your campaign is 100% digital. And of course, those traveling costs, whereby I think a lot of the travel companies, airline companies should be a lot more cooperative. Thanks, Chin Huat. Moving along, Prof. Let's discuss significant supplementary costs during elections, including public education and other areas of interest. How do these also crop up, particularly in growing as well as a very vibrant democracy as what we've seen in Malaysia over the past 5 years?
I would rather see all these costs as investment because for good things in life, there are always some costs. For example, if you want to wear the same dress for everyone in the whole country, you save costs in production, but that's not the kind of life you want. So likewise in politics, if you want to have choices, we want to have effective check and balances, then you need to have elections, you need to have all this contestation through electoral campaign and so on. And in the process for people to make informed decision, you need to help the voters to make sense of the complicated political issues. And for that reason, you actually need... Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, for that matter, you need to actually have you need to actually have education. So for me, all these costs are actually investment to make our democracy vibrant.
Very true. And also, of course, it comes to investing from all political parties across the divide. And this can actually include national advertising, providing election process information to citizens, particularly key considering that we did have, of course, Undi 18 bypass quite recently, which added a few million voters onto the electoral rolls. Right. Prof, if I could move on to the next part that I would like to discuss. Now, other factors concurrent with election periods in general are government debt, reduced taxes, postponing of key economic and business decisions, and slower credit growth. So what are the overall impacts on inflation and economic growth as well when it comes to general election seasons and also when you have these additional elections and by-elections throughout one fiscal year?
Tamina, this is a very good question. I mean, our by-election and state elections, I don't think they produce as much impact on inflation and, say, some rock star concert in Western capital. I think the larger question here is that the incentive for politicians to avoid making the right or necessary policy decision because they can manipulate the election date. That's come back also to another part of the issues. When we come to election season, that's almost sometimes by-election season, that politicians use policy to buy votes. So they give very generous offer to different sectors, for example, pay rise for civil servants, subsidies for this, subsidies for that, and projects, local development projects that might not be necessary. So what we need to introduce here to reduce all those unnecessary costs is to, on one hand, to have predictable elections calendar. So we know when elections to happen, so that when politicians want to adjust this, they still face the constraint. And second thing is to enhance fiscal prudence and responsibility. This can be done in many ways. For example, to have an independent parliamentary budget office, to studies on policy proposal raised by various parties, whether it's government or opposition. All these things would help us to remember one thing. The cheapest thing that we learn in economics, that's opportunity cost. For every good thing, you might have to forego everything else. And to have a good decision, you really need to think through about all the options and the opportunity cost that you have to consider.
Certainly. And also, of course, once again, emphasizing that economic growth and political stability are deeply interconnected. Moving on to some more recent developments, Prof. Now, concerns about the health status of MPs has led, of course, Dewan Rakyat mandating health screenings for all by October the 31st. A good start to help keep the coffers fuller, perhaps, with regards to unexpected by-elections. Your thoughts, Prof, on making this more impactful and reducing frequent by-elections moving forward? We have the health checkups now. What should happen next?
Yes, certainly this is a good thing, whether or not that it would cause a by-election. I think it's always good to have our elected representatives to be in good health. What is more important here, I think, is that we need to look at the larger questions of by-election, which can be caused by, say, for example, accident and also factors that do not cut short the lifespans of our elected representative. For example, if any MP were to change their party affiliations, they would lose their seats and they have to face by-election. And those things are good. What we really need to look at here, if we want to reduce by-elections, the solution is not what proposed by former Deputy Chairman of Election Commissions, Datuk Sri Wan Ahmad, that we should ban or prohibit or do away by-election. Instead, we should consider changing our electoral system. Currently, we have one vote for the Federal Parliament, one vote for the State Assembly. But if you look at countries, and I'm talking about even just Asian countries like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and as close as Thailand, people actually have two votes for the same legislature. One vote is for the elected representatives, as we know, as we have it. The other vote is to vote for party. Now, how does it work if in Malaysia? If we're going to say on top of the 222 MPs, we create another layers of MPs who are directly representing party. For example, in Selangor, if you turn it into another layer of constituency, and let's say you give it 10 seats extra, and then every party can nominate up to 10 candidates, and for us, when we vote, we just go by the party, and then the 10 seats will be allocated to different parties. So if a party wins 40% of votes, the party would get 4 out of 10, at least 4 out of 10 from that. Now, what happens if one of the MP, for whatever reason, speak or ceases to be in office, then what we would do is that the next available candidate will replace it. So that seat would remain with the party without having a by-election.
Thanks for that, Prof. And now, before we end, though, just to re-emphasize, of course, and these are some of the challenges that occur when you've got frequent by-elections, institutional memory and the knock-on effect as each new MP who is elected after a sudden passing of an incumbent, the portfolio mandate being changed by the newly elected one. Why is this always problematic when it comes to especially hyper-localized issues and, of course, having continuity?
Actually, putting aside on the well-being of elected representatives, sometimes I think midterm change of elected representative may not necessarily be a bad thing. If you have a by-election and some of the issue may be debated more timely, more effectively, some new issue could be bring into consideration throughout the campaign. So the new elected representative, if not the incumbent one, would probably champion some of the newer issues more effectively. But how do we actually make sure this does not cause disruption to institutional memory and so on? That come back to, for example, if we are looking at national issue, our parliament should consist of many select committees. Currently, we have only 10 to cover over 26 ministerial portfolios. That's really not enough. We should actually have more so that all these MPs who are not ministers get to sit into one of these committees and play their role in scrutinizing and shaping policies and legal bills and so on. Now, if you have a by-elections and a new MPs get in and that MPs actually get to join one of these committees, they would have a role to play. And because that the institutional memory and functions is captured through all these committees, a change of a few members would not actually disrupt the work of the parliament so much. Currently, unfortunately, our MPs most of the time spend their times on constituency work because people cannot see how the lawmakers actually shape laws and policy if they are not ministers.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that overview. Very comprehensive indeed, Chin Huat. That was Professor Wong Chin Huat, political scientist with Sunway University, discussing, of course, the economic costs of by-elections. We take a quick break now. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Niaga Spotlight.
Magnum Matcha Crumble baru. Aiskrim matcha lembut, salutan coklat tebal, dan cepisan biskut rangup. Magnum Matcha Crumble baru. Magnum, kenikmatan sejati.
Serlakan keceriaan dengan Gardenia Quick Bites.
Stars Gegar Vaganza mulai 24 September di saluran-saluran berikut.
Lights out, full throttle, and we're underway. Banyai, then that's beautifully done on the inside of Malaysia's Vargan. Banyai on the inside of Martin into turn number 7. What a move this is. He's got Bender and Miller in front of him. How close was that? Banyaya has this British Grand Prix covered. It's been an absolute classic.
The MotoGP, live on Spo TV.
Sebenarnya digital ekonomi itu boleh dilakukan di peringkat ASEAN dan juga di beyond ASEAN ini.
Infrastruktur penunjang teknologi, backbone-nya itu bisa menjadi lebih kuat.
Why is this belief still around, especially when talking about Islam?
It means that you should be free to do what you want as long as you don't impinge on the liberty of others.
Mengapa kerajaan dan M10 memilih jabatan perangkaan?
Jadi dengan adanya integrasi ini kita akan dapat melihatkan real situasi.
Agenda Awani setiap hari di Astro Awani dan Astro Go.
Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kauschi. Now, today on Future Affairs, we shift the focus to boardroom gender diversity and the profit equation. The Madani government is committed to increasing Malaysian women's labour force participation to 60% from the current 56%, which is low by both regional and international standards, especially when compared to men's 81% odd LFPR. It's timely that we look at yet another dimension of positive impact from women, boardroom gender diversity, and the profit equation. Now, FYI, according to the United Nations International Labour Organization, or ILO, gender equality in the boardroom makes companies 20% more likely to improve their performance. Meanwhile, Securities Commission, or SC, Malaysia's target to have 30% of women on the board of large public listed companies, as stated in the Malaysian Code of Corporate Governance, was actually achieved in June this year. However, for all PLCs in Malaysia to have 30% women on board will require 351 more women. Pauline Ho, partner PwC Malaysia and PwC APAC, human capital leader and steering committee member with 30% Club Malaysia, joins me now in the studios to discuss strategies for increasing boardroom gender diversity and the profit equation behind it. Hello, Pauline. Thank you so much for making time for us. How are you this morning?
I'm good. Thanks for having me here, Tamina.
Wonderful. So, Pauline, let's get the conversation started by speaking about 30% Club Malaysia's board mentoring has just achieved something momentous. You welcome the biggest number of mentees for your newest cohort. So, tell us a little bit more about this entire program and how it's been going.
Yeah, so the board mentoring scheme is what we call it. It's a collaboration between PwC Malaysia and 30% Club. We launched this in 2017 with 10 mentees, right? So for the eighth cohort, where we celebrated on the 13th of September, we had 20 who completed the scheme, and our largest cohort, 29, for the 9th cohort. Of course, throughout the years, since 2017 to date, we have 106 mentees who have completed, and 97 very, very experienced mentors who have volunteered repeatedly to help our mentees. So the board mentoring scheme is really a cross-sector board-level mentoring for experienced board members to provide guidance and share experience, help them expand their network for building relationship purposes, and understand what it takes to be a board member. So all these board-ready women are matched to experienced board members in a series of meetings over a 9-month period.
Right. So it does sound extremely interesting, especially the way in which 30% Club, Pauline, has been able to build capacity all the way from the first cohort that you say was only 10 mentees. But now let's focus on the ethos behind 30% Club itself. Why 30%? And why is that a sort of a magic number when we look towards capacity building, be it in political or even in corporate arenas?
Well, we have heard about 30% being a tipping point. right? The intent is not really to say that 30% is the goal, right? When 30% Club started, it is a business campaign in the UK, and then Malaysia chapter was announced in 2015 by the then Prime Minister, right? So the intention was for businesses to understand the importance of diversity. It extends beyond the boardroom really, but the focus at that point in time for 30% Club is to be the first, for Malaysia to be the first country in ASEAN to achieve 30%. And as you're aware, as of 1st June, we have achieved 30.6% women representation for the top 100 companies on Bursa. So, it was a significant achievement.
Absolutely, but such a significant achievement. And when it comes to that magic number of women in the boardroom, I think perhaps if you could draw from some of your own personal experience or even those of your cohort and those from your circles, what difference does it really make on a very practical day-to-day aspect when there are actually at least 30% women in boardrooms during strategic junctures such as, of course, the AGMs and etc.?
Yeah, so if you look at, there's a lot of studies out there, right, to prove that,
Sure.
When you have a diverse board, including gender diversity being one of the key features, you will have a lot more constructive arguments. Not to say that there aren't any among men, amongst the group of men, but
Sure.
Just having a different kind of perspective really helps in better decision making. So there are enough studies out there to show that there is a correlation between better company performance in terms of share price, in terms of PE multiples, right, in terms of return on equity. A study done by ICDM of 312 PLCs, if I remember correctly, between 2017 and 2019 shows that boards or companies with 1/3 female representation actually perform significantly better than those without, right? So, if you're an investor, you probably think about, yeah, this is important, right, for us to get better value from a company. So, it just goes to show that it is important.
And it can also, of course, then meet those gender goals and targets that we are increasingly adopting even globally. Pauline, share with me a little bit more about 30% Club's overall new focus and theme when it comes to gender.
Yeah, so you must have heard about the new tagline, Path to Parity, and that's what you're referring to, yeah? So, when, just like your question earlier, why 30%? We talk about the tipping point. But at the end of the day, if you think about the world, we are about 50-50 in terms of population.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
And if that is the case, then why is it not the same across everything? Right, so that's why we are looking at parity, and it extends beyond gender now. The focus is really looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right, so whilst we still talk a lot about gender diversity, it's really about everything else that is diverse in terms of intergenerational workforce that we have. Right, so boards should not be only of a certain age. Right, there are different perspectives that a younger generation board member may be able to bring, and that is your target customer for a lot of companies as well. Right, we also talk about people with disabilities or differently abled people. Right, so there is also the social inclusion aspects if you think about that.
Correct. And from there, I'd like to zone in on an issue that, of course, you're also very passionate about, together with PwC as well as 30% Club, which is the fact that, yes, we are slowly but surely really achieving those targets when it comes to the top 100 PLCs. We'll talk a little bit more about the other PLCs later, but first let's speak about women in senior management and leadership roles, Pauline. What are some of the gaps that have been noticed that are quite pronounced, as well as the reasons behind it? Looking at women in the workforce, you've got a couple of the usual suspects, right? Motherhood penalty, the 7% or so gender wage gap. How do these play out when it comes to opportunities for promotion and leadership just to get over there?
Yeah, so as you rightly pointed out, a lot of times the caregiving responsibility rests on women, not only in terms of motherhood, also in terms of aging parents, or just caregiving in general. So if we want to address this, it really goes back down to whether, setting the right tone from the top, whether you have a strategy that includes looking at fair policies that applies to both gender to enable caregiving, for instance, to be carried out by both genders. So that's why I'm a strong proponent of parental leave as opposed to extending maternity leave. If you think about extending maternity leave, yes, whilst it's important for women to be born,
to make those international standards as well, which in
Yes.
some countries go up to 9 months to even 3 to 4 years, right?
Yeah. But I wouldn't say we should go there. We should focus on parental leave, because if you continue to extend maternity and not think about paternity, that is really re-emphasizing that women should be doing the main caregiving for kids, right? For children. And for policies like what we have in PwC Malaysia, Flex Care, where you are able to take time off to take care of family members who are ill, or and it applies to both gender. So then it's not restrictive that it must be the women that takes time off to take care of the elderly or the sick.
That's very interesting. And flex care-wise, Pauline, what kind of trends has PwC been able to observe when it comes to the demographic that is actually opting in for flex care? Is it still primarily women, or are we also seeing some numbers from men?
We actually don't track that because we treat it as any other caregiving responsibilities, right?
Right, interesting.
Yeah, but what we do notice is that now, from demographic perspective, 60% of our manager level and below are women. 40% directors and partners are women. So I guess some of these policies must be working out well, otherwise we won't have that.
Yeah.
Right? And we have our first female chairperson, Nurul Ain, as well.
Yeah, exactly. So we've definitely heard about that, and that is great news because, once again, being a market leader, that helps to reflect positively that sort of a sentiment across the structures, right? So hopefully we'll see fairly more female chairpersons as well when it comes to other PLCs as well as internationals. Pauline, now let's move along to the factor and back to PLCs in Malaysia.
Yeah.
So when it comes to those that are not doing all that well, for especially the gender narrative, there do in fact happen to be 19 PLCs that still have all male boards. Now, how can gender diversity encourage better governance management? Let's focus on that first.
Okay. From a governance management point, I would prefer that you hear it from experts, right? So people who have done enough survey on this. So there was this link between governance and trust that can be observed, and the Edelman Trust Barometer study, specifically for institutional investors in 2020, actually found that 63% of investors in the US says if you disclose employee diversity, the company is more trustworthy. Right. So that is one aspect of it. And from a strategic decision-making perspective, studies have actually shown that when you have a diverse board, there is less comfort. I did talk about potential for groupthink just now.
Correct.
Right? When you have a diverse group of people together, chances are it's less comfortable. And when it's less comfortable, actually, creates a lot more debate and discussions, which leads to better decisions and better outcomes. And ultimately, it is about financial performance. If we are in a business segment after all.
True.
Right. So for companies who have not had diverse boards yet, really should consider the ICDM study, as I mentioned, where the percentage I have here now, 38%, higher median return on equity as compared to boards without diverse.
That's significant, 28%, right?
38.
Oh, sorry, 38. Okay,
yes.
38. So that's even more significant, Pauline. Right. Now let's go into perhaps, of course, we do not have someone from any of those 19 PLCs here with us right now, but to ponder a little bit upon the factors that may cause also a dearth of available candidates who are women to step up into both senior leadership as well as management roles. So PwC, as you'd mentioned, for example, has flex care as one of your options. Now, there are other matters that are related to unpaid care work, such as access to childcare. Are there any achievements that have been made, any movement in this sector which has helped employees, in your experience, to manage the work-life balance better, both for women as well as for men?
Yeah, I think you pointed out childcare as an important perspective, and I think in the past the government has also provided some incentives for companies to create childcare, but it's not so straightforward for a lot of companies to do so. to have a childcare facility within the organization itself. It's really about providing options for childcare rather than just a facility. I mean, that's one perspective of it. On to your earlier question about companies, why are they unable to find women board members, for example, or why do they have less female in the pipeline?
Correct.
For senior management? It could well be that they haven't really considered people who don't put up their hands. Why do I say that? There has been enough studies, I'm sure you've read about as well, where if there is an opportunity for advancement,
sure,
if you ask a female, they will go down the checklist and say, oh, I probably don't meet all of them and I shouldn't volunteer myself for the role. The reverse for men, right? As long as they feel that they're quite confident, they'll be able to learn on the job. They would be able to, they will put up their hand for the particular role. So if that is the case, is there any mentoring program like what we do in 30% Club, or any kind of coaching and development that focuses on helping these women who has significant potential to overcome some of these barriers that could be individually created? It's not really a competence issue, it's just a confidence issue perhaps.
And perhaps also the wider picture is that this is how we are sociologically raised, as the gender difference between boys and girls, which also begins in school, and there can be many other factors leading to it, right?
Yes, I still remember getting very excited when I saw a particular Bina ayat by my kids when they were young.
Sure.
Right? And I always share this story. I came back and they were doing Bina ayat, so I was having a look at what they were writing, and it's like, always ibu sedang mencuci pinggan di dapur.
Oh yes, that's so familiar, right? I mean,
yes.
I'm getting flashbacks of my school days.
And bapa baru balik dari kerja or something along those lines. Yeah. So if we don't change the textbooks, then how are we going to build the next generation who believe that both genders can be whoever they want to be?
And everything that we see replicated in daily life, all the way to what we see in advertising, mass media, as well as even in the news media, right?
Yes.
It further emboldens stereotypes. Okay, so moving along from stereotypes as well as the gender gap, let's talk about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Now, this is, of course, one of the latest buzz phrases that has been taking, of course, the corporate world by storm. Particularly, we feel and we've observed these changes once the pandemic, work from home orders had set in, and now, of course, we're in a complete economic recovery stage. Most places have actually gone back to either completely working from the office or even a hybrid sort of a workforce. So tell me about why DEI, Pauline, is also a really important factor when we look at boardroom gender representation.
I think it is an important factor from an employee attraction standpoint as well. I've explained earlier about how companies are deemed more trustworthy if they provide statistics around diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you think about our workforce nowadays, they are a lot better read, or more exposed to current affairs as compared to the past. Right, and being that, and if we want to progress as an organization, you really need to get the top talents that's available in the market, and it is a war for talent. I mean, as you mentioned, post-pandemic, one of the biggest issue companies face, other than the economic challenges, is really whether they have enough people to deliver their strategies and achieve their goals. So if you're not an attractive employer, where a lot of employees now are looking at how do they align their values to that of the company, whether they are doing meaningful work, whether they are actually overall well-being, which talks about the mental well-being, besides the work-life balance perspective of working too many hours, right? It's part of the equation. So a company that has very progressive policies or strategies with regards to DEI is seen as an organization that they would be more aligned to, right? And therefore you'll be able to attract better talents.
That would actually be quite natural and quite instinctive, right?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about PwC's experiences in ensuring DEI, both in Malaysia, but also within your role as you've observed across the Asia-Pacific region.
So the PwC approach starts from the global, as a network.
Okay.
Right? We are a global affiliation or network of firms. So as part of the network, there is a global strategy, right, on I&D, where we believe that this is, we need to basically embed in our language is I&D, inclusion and diversity, rather than call it DEI, right? So we need to embed I&D within our DNA and culture, right, in order for us to achieve our strategy as a network. So in doing so, you know, it's not like the network saying, you must have this as a strategy. It's just a 2+ approach where gender must be the one. And then you have 2 additional local considerations for each of the country. Right, so that's how it is, from a strategy perspective, is spread to all the territories. And then at each territory, the 2+ approach becomes part of leadership KPIs.
I see. That's so interesting. Would you be able to share what those 2 additional KPIs are or strategy areas when it comes to the Malaysian market?
Yeah, so we have gender, we have social inclusion, and we have people with disabilities.
Right.
Right, and we set medium and long-term targets because it's not something that can be achieved overnight.
Sure.
Yeah, so, and that is not only pertaining to Malaysia, I mean, other territories have their own areas as well. So specifically for Malaysia, we have put that as part of our leadership KPIs. And then, of course, we have to ensure that we track, and to be accountable, we also publish this data in our annual report. Right, and for other territories, you know, for example, Japan, people with disabilities is a very big focus for them. In addition to gender, they are not doing as well as Malaysia at the moment, right? But they are working towards that. So for PWDs, they have been, you know, really focusing on how to find the right jobs and to enable them to flourish and develop as well. Right, having different career pathways as well.
Very true. And I just had a quick insight that I would love to glean from you. Speaking about, of course, the future of work and DEI, and of course, social inclusion and disability inclusion as well. Where do you see big picture, perhaps in a decade's time, all of this playing out, also when it comes to increasing mechanization, particularly in the corporate sector, whereby we are actually removing employees that are at the lower level and focusing more on technical skills? Do you see that as being an opportunity to perhaps revamp and still have more individuals with disabilities on board, as well as meeting the gender components in the near future?
Yeah, I think actually it does help, right? You know, a lot of administrative related work is what will be mechanized, right? If we start thinking about, you know, in the past there has been, or it continues to have, a lot of studies talking about, you know, human being replaced by robots or by programs, right? And then there is a whole push about upskilling. I believe that, you know, as human beings, all of us can learn, unlearn and relearn. And it is about, you know, finding what is our strengths and to be able to then, you know, leverage that and not have to do things that a lot of people do not want to do anyway to start with.
Also true, the grunt work, the monotonous work, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so, for example, we had an experience with, you know, a differently able person who is has an autism spectrum. So, you know, instead of doing just detailed data work, he's able to spot trends, you know, identify anomalies, and it was very effective as compared to, you know, for our other team members who has a less affinity or, you know, competency in this area and prefer to engage people more, right? So everyone, I think, has different skills to bring to an organization, and I believe that with the automation that you mentioned, it will really help us zoom in on the human side of, you know, of us all, and be able to then leverage that even better.
Thank you. I think it's very valuable that you're able to share from a management perspective as well how disability does not necessarily have to be a disadvantage during employment. Focusing a little while again on the attracting and retailing talent part, particularly when it comes to what we actually noticed across the pandemic's retrenchments. Women of all sectors, particularly those working in professional capacities, were often unable to cope with the tripling of burdens when it came to unpaid care work, and many actually were either retrenched or they left their jobs. Now, what opportunity arises now for all of those women and even more to be encouraged to come into the workforce by closing that upskilling gap, since women especially, have possibly lost about more than a year or so of professional access?
Yeah. So I'm not sure whether you've heard, Talent Corp actually had this career comeback.
That's right.
Website, yeah. And I think we need to continue to emphasize on that, right? We have hired women who have been out of work for a couple of years because of different priorities and commitments at that point in time, and help them come back to the workforce as well, right? So I think there is a need for some readjustment, because unless a person has been, actively keeping themselves very relevant and well trained during the period of not at work, right? There is a period of adjustment, and employers need to understand that actually the individual coming back to work has a whole lot of experience before they start work, and it doesn't go away, right? The ability to then tap into the experience of the past with just a little bit of upskilling is so valuable. Right, so a very short gestation period is the investment time that's required, but I feel that the benefits thereafter is significant. So should look at a medium-term view as opposed to whether a person can just hit the ground running.
Exactly. And I'm going back to the bottom line before we conclude, Pauline. Let's speak about ESG investing, which of course is one of the fastest growing trends in the investment community over the last few years. So what does the data show about women in boardrooms also being linked to more ethical business practices, and of course ultimately having a much higher ESG score when it comes to all these PLCs and companies? We're talking about those 800 odd companies that don't quite meet those measures of 30% women on boards yet.
Yeah. So there is no survey in Malaysia specifically on this point.
Yeah, that we understand.
Yeah, but in the US, the annual corporate director survey in 2022 actually shows that female directors do value diversity a lot more. Right, for across all dimensions, whether it's gender, race or ethnicity, age, tenure, right? So there is a marked difference between what is deemed as important to female directors versus the male directors. And female directors also prioritize climate change, right? Even if in the short term, there is some impact to bottom line, right? I guess there is always a debate about that, right? But if companies start thinking about climate change, addressing climate change as an opportunity as opposed to only a risk, right?
Or only something which you have to allocate budget towards, right?
That's right. So I think that really helps a company make decisions that are, help the company on the longer term from a sustainability perspective. There is also a connection between ESG to strategy, that the women seems to agree more that ESG issues are linked to company strategy, and it is a priority. And also the final one is that female directors are more likely to say company actions can improve trust. That's 81% of female versus 66% of...
Wow, trust. So when it comes to investments, when it comes to anything to do with finances, literally, particularly for those who would be in the actual economic sectors, I think nothing can trump that.
That's right. So that's why I thought it's an important point to highlight.
Fantastic.
It's the last point to remind.
All right, wonderful. Pauline, it's been so great having you in the studios with us. Any last words before we conclude with regards to the importance of not just actively promoting more gender diversity in the boardroom, but why ultimately this ought to be something which organizations naturally move towards, not because they're trying to hit some target?
Yeah. I think it has gone beyond whether it's the right thing to do. I think it's a business issue that companies need to really think about. If you think about your customer profile, your workforce, right? What is it that we are looking at? We are trying to, to be responsible business that will be sustainable over the long period of time. If that's the case, then looking at the demographics, it just sort of makes sense that your company reflects what you see in terms of your workforce and your customers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this, Pauline. It's been wonderful having you on the show. So that, of course, was Pauline Ho with PwC Malaysia. This has been Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kausti. We'll see you next Friday with more business analysis and insights. Here's to a productive week ahead.